Lots of talk about pardons. We will see if we get to that level. I think, when we talk about Hunter Biden's pardon, we go to the power of the president. We walk through that very specifically on the show. We're looking to see about these other preemptive pardons. I do think if you look at the pardon of Nixon by Gerald Ford, you see that there is precedent already for preemptive pardons, and no one at that time tried to challenge that I know of. There may have been people that tried to bring lawsuits against President Nixon, but once he left office, I don't remember ever reading about anything moving anywhere past being dismissed immediately by a court. So it does look like it would be possible to do this. Does that mean that it wouldn't be looked at by a court now and now that we're into 2024, 2025? No, it doesn't. So I think that, again, you have to take all this with a grain of salt and remember this is another kind of story showing you what's happening at this White House the moment Joe Biden leaves the country or Joe Biden's outside the White House. His team has got stories out that he has not even been consulted on.
And Jordan, another thing...
Because I think they're mad about what he did with Hunter Biden. I think his own team, the left and the Democrats, realize he created a precedent for Donald Trump in the future so that what happened to Donald Trump and his staff, never happens again.
And I think another point to bring out on this is that, even the left that's saying he's abusing this power, really, if it were to somehow be challenged, I don't know, and I'm not the attorney, but it seems like it would be very hard to find someone who is standing to bring that challenge. And even if they did, and it made it all the way to the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court has been very generous with the interpretation of presidential power. Yep. We got that from the immunity ruling. And so you see that, and even if it did get all the way to the Supreme Court, challenging his wide sweeping pardons, I don't know that even if there are some commentators that can make the point that maybe it went too far, that the Supreme Court would be inclined to put a limit on that presidential pardon power because it's pretty plain in the Constitution. The only thing he can't grant a pardon for is for impeachment, because that's the political process. So people may be crying foul on the left, and I think that people like Karine Jean-Pierre may be pretty frustrated that she had to go out there and repeat that line, no, it will never happen, so many times. Right. But I don't know that there's any recourse for anyone to go back after the president and try to clean up the widespread usage if he chooses to go down that road.
No, I think after that, it was all bets are off. And this White House, again, they're not even consulting the president. He's the one that actually has the power. I guess they're kind of come up with, what do we give him a briefing on this? And should we actually recommend this to the president of the United States before he leaves office? On January 20th. Usually these come on, very late in the day on January 19th, where these kind of more controversial pardons get issued. But they would have to approach people. I don't think they want a bunch of people offered pardons by the president who then say, no, I don't need a pardon because I didn't do anything wrong or illegal. I'm not worried about like that. I just called for investigations into something. And the people who made the decisions about that are the ones who have to do follow the law the right way. Let's go to Jeff in North Carolina on line one. Hey, Jeff, welcome to Seculo. You're on the air.
Hey, guys, thanks for taking my call. Just curious, President Biden have the authority to blanket pardon for all illegal immigrants? Is that possible?
To blanket pardon for all illegal immigrants. Now, this is interesting. They're not citizens of the United States. I don't know if that would come into play. Let me bring in Harry Hutchinson. Harry, do you think that you could actually blanket pardon people for entering the country illegally, though that wouldn't necessarily give them citizenship either? I mean, that would really just mean they couldn't be prosecuted for it. I don't think it would stop them from being removed.
I think you're precisely correct.
Because you don't get citizenship from that.
So you don't have a presumptive legal right to remain in the United States, even if you have entered the country legally. So, for instance, someone from France who, let's say, had a visa, or there's an agreement between the French government and the American government, they could enter the United States legally, but nonetheless, the U.S. government would have the right to remove them. So I don't think a presidential pardon with respect to illegal immigrants will necessarily prevent President Trump from removing them because they are no longer in this country legally.
Yeah, and I think also there, what you've got is you're right. So you got a situation there where you might not be able to then be prosecuted for the charge, but that doesn't mean that you can stay. So I think that's, again, I see why people are starting to look at it broadly. That's because of what President Biden did, not because of President Trump. It's because of President Biden issuing a pardon that goes for Hunter Biden that wasn't specific to the charges he was dealing with, even while President Biden was in office, but goes back to 2014. So, and then it says for anything that he might have been, that may have been, doesn't know if he was or not. I mean, it's so broad.
Right. And the way that I read the Constitution, he could pardon someone who's not a U.S. citizen.
Right.
It's not that it has to be a U.S. citizen to get a pardon. However, as you mentioned, it doesn't mean that grants you a citizenship or even future immunity as well from things. And I know I've seen a lot of people asking that question too, and I'll pose it to you too, of that the pardon power is past looking. It's not a forward looking blanket immunity for anything you may do in the future. And the president's pardon power ends on January 20th of 2025 when he leaves office. But I think the concern that a lot of people have, and even on the left with how broad the Hunter Biden pardon was, and now this discussion we're seeing out of Politico that raises this question of just going through the government and giving these people pardons, does it set bad precedent for anyone? Because if they can then do that, and Biden can, which it is a very broad power, but if you're not using it necessarily responsibly and you're using it as a political weapon against your
to be weaponized.
Exactly. I think that's the more dangerous precedent here, is making the world look at America as acting very banana republic-ish.
Yeah.
And that's,
you don't want the pardon power to be the most important power of a president. I mean, you want it to kind of be a power that is used rarely and uniquely, and it doesn't usually absolve the person who gets the pardon. Usually the person who gets the pardon was already seen in the eyes of the public as someone who was guilty. It is again, it's, I think, tough to have that power and not use it for your son, which is why I think the White House was so out of step with Joe Biden. And it felt like a White House that was talking not on his behalf for the last 2 years, at least, of this White House, including removing him from the ticket, that really he wasn't being consulted. And by the way, you know what's interesting on this issue? It's all in the news, right? Guess who they haven't asked about doing this yet? Joe Biden. So they say in this article, though the White House counsel for Joe Biden has been involved in these discussions, so very high up in the legal chain at the White House, that Joe Biden himself has not been consulted about whether or not he would want to even consider offering these potential pardons to individuals in a pre-criminal way. And again, I think there's a big concern that because they'd be preemptive, a lot of these politicians would say no. Now, is that the same if you're talking about some of these mid-level bad actors at the FBI or DOJ? Maybe not. And I think that's where it gets more troubling, because those people have to be cleaned up to de-weaponize government. And there may be legitimate crimes that occurred. And though you may prosecute some, it may actually just be a way to easier, and Harry, this is because we know how hard it is to remove federal bureaucrats once they're entrenched. And if you're mid-level at DC IRS or DC FBI or DOJ, you're pretty entrenched at that point. That at least if you want to de-weaponize the government, if you don't want to bring the criminal charges against them, maybe at least the idea that they have committed these crimes or could have committed these crimes is a way to remove them.
I think that's absolutely correct. I think it's also important to keep in mind that Joe Biden is a particularly selfish guy, and a large number of commentators have suggested his pardon of his son was very selfish. It benefited Joe Biden, particularly with respect to Burisma and Ukraine. So the question becomes, will any of these proposed pardons actually benefit Joe Biden? And I think at the end of the day, the answer is no. So I'm not necessarily sure he will care whether Liz Cheney or James Comey or Fauci is indeed pardoned, because the question becomes, does it benefit the Biden family?
And Jordan, it also shows you something about the people in the White House that were so concerned about President Trump being a threat to democracy, how little respect they have for our democracy, of being a strong democracy and trusting our judicial system, if they believe...
Well, I don't think they do. I
right.
think they understand that the DOJ has been weaponized by them, and that means it could be easily weaponized by Donald Trump and his team. And that doesn't take many steps. That's like one step. All you do is say, investigate these people. We believe that they committed crimes that would not be... These acts would not be covered by their position in Congress, that they did commit crimes or they leaked information that was classified. The list goes on. Or for some of these prosecutors at the DOJ, that what they did was improper and the way they used the information was improper. But again, if we want to de-weaponize, it does not mean that we're not going to have to get rid of or prosecute some actors inside the FBI and DOJ. But going after just big names to go after big names is not the way to de-weaponize a system for the long-term future. Support the work of the ACLJ.